Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And welcome back to the RPM podcast. And today we are going to dive into sprint qualifying at the Silverstone Grand Prix. So we're going to do a bit of an RPM roundup today. We haven't done one in a while, but this is something we wanted to dive into because it's a slight change in the format. Well, actually, it's a big old change in the format to what we are used to on a race weekend. And for a lot of us, including myself, this is one of the very first or few format changes of the race weekend. F1 has stayed quite stagnant in the last 10 years. Of course, we had the elimination qualifying, which was around for one day, and that got binned off quite quickly. And here we are with sprint qualifying. So let's dive straight into it.
Well, let's get started by talking about what the new format actually is. What can we expect at the British Grand Prix? So the sprint qualifying, as it's called, will be a race run over 100 kilometres, lasting around 25 to 30 minutes. Points will be awarded, but only to the top three finishers. 3 for the winner, 2 for second, 1 for third. So not many points up for grabs. Now, there won't be a podium ceremony either. The winner will get a trophy in Parc Fermé, kind of similar to normal qualifying where they get their Pirelli Pole Sitter Tyre Award. So it'll be somewhat similar to that. And then the finishing order of the sprint qualifying race will define the grid for Sunday's main event. Now, as this will take place on Saturday, there will be FP1 on Friday, followed by the normal qualifying with Q1, Q2, Q3, after which that will set the grid for the sprint qualifying. Then before the sprint on Saturday, there will be another practice session, and then the main race will be on Sunday. So we've got 2 practice sessions, 2 qualifying events, 1 each on Friday and Saturday, and then the race on Sunday. Still following so far, I hope. It's pretty complicated, this qualifying stuff. So then the sprint winner will also be officially recognised as a pole position winner, which is a little bit controversial because it will kind of change what it means to be on pole position, not over a single lap time, but over an entire race. So that's interesting. And there's a few other changes regarding tyre sets. For example, on Friday practice, the teams can use any 2 sets of their weekend allocation of 12, which is down from 3 because of the reduced running. And they still have to put the required sets aside for standard qualifying on Friday, which is 5 sets of softs, I believe, and the race, which is 2 free choices. And there's also a very limited number of changes and fixes that the teams can make between normal qualifying and sprint qualifying. And all of this could be amended after the British Grand Prix as well, because Michael Massey has already said that there might be a need for further regulation tweaks in case anything unexpected pops up. And I think that might be the case because it's generally the case that when things are quite complicated, when ideas are quite complex, there's more unexpected factors there might be. So we'll see what happens there. So that's a general rundown of what we can expect. Shane, what are your initial thoughts as we approach the British Grand Prix with this sprint qualifying? How do you feel about it?
I'm really looking forward to it, and that's not because I wholeheartedly agree with the idea. I think it's something different, and it's something a bit quirky for Formula One, which is why I'm looking forward to it. It's definitely going to make the whole race weekend really interesting. So where we've had traditionally practice on a Friday, qualifying on a Saturday, and race on a Sunday, we've now got qualifying, and a race. So actually, for those who turn up on a Friday, and I know a lot of people who are just going on the Friday, they get to see a qualifying session. They get to see these F1 cars go at their maximum potential, which I think is absolutely amazing. And then going into Saturday and Sunday, you have the traditional, you have a sprint race now, which determines the qualifying for the whole race. Now, technically, how do I feel like it's going to go? I've got loads of ideas of how I think some teams might go all guns blazing. Other teams might be quite reserved. It's going to be so interesting. And like you said, because the rules are so complicated and because there's so many things which have to be done in the correct order, the cars aren't in Parc Fermé, but there's very little they can do between the 2 qualifying sessions. I just can't wait to see what teams pop up with different ideas or different interpretations of how the race weekend is going to go, because this is the first time it's ever been run like this. And I can see teams like maybe Aston Martin or McLaren reading between the lines, but not necessarily reading between the lines, but trying to extract some kind of advantage by bending, not necessarily bending the rules, but rereading them in a particular way, if you get what I mean. It's a very, very interesting race weekend, and I can't wait. What's your initial thoughts? And before we go into like the times and stuff, what's your initial thoughts about the whole weekend?
Well, as I've heard more and more about this idea, obviously it was announced a little while ago, and we did do a roundup when they were just considering it and it hadn't been officially announced. And I think I feel kind of the same way as I did then, which is that I'm not really convinced that it's going to do much for the racing or for the enticing of new fans for the sport. It could yet do that, but I'm not really convinced that it's going to do that. Firstly, there's the issue of having two races, which kind of cheapens the Sunday race a little bit. And strategically, I'm not sure people will take too many risks when only the top three are getting a small number of points. A position gained here or there could be to the advantage of teams further down the grid, but I think if it were up to me, I'd do everything as usual during standard qualifying, get the best possible position, and then play it pretty safe to ensure that stays more or less the same way for Sunday, because overtakes might present themselves, but I'm not particularly convinced that we're going to see too much exciting racing because the stakes are fairly low and the cost of getting it wrong just means that you have an even worse chance going into the longer race. So it seems like if you're at the if a driver qualifies much lower down than expected, say you're in like a Red Bull or a Ferrari or something, and you suddenly find yourself much lower down after Q1 or Q2 or something because of something that happens, the sprint for qualifying gives you an opportunity to overturn that deficit before the race. And conversely, a driver that qualifies much higher than expected might simply lose those places during the sprint qualifying and subsequently do even worse than they might have done on Sunday. So it's possible that it might have an equalizing effect where the drama of qualifying is neutralized.
So to put names in that scenario, Daniel Ricciardo has an appalling qualifying session on Friday and qualifies in P13. But actually, in the sprint qualifying, say he gets up to P7. That's fantastic for the race. Now, on the flip side, Lando Norris...
Good for him, anyway.
Yeah, good for him. On the flip side, George Russell qualifies, say, P10 or P11 in the actual qualifying session. And then we go on to the sprint race where historically he may drop back a few positions due to the nature of the track and the circuit. Now, he's going to be worse off for the actual race than he would have done if he just stuck with the traditional qualifying. So you can really see how one driver could benefit so much, like Daniel Ricciardo, because his race pace is so much better than his qualifying pace at the moment. But actually, George Russell's qualifying pace is brilliant and is really outperforming that Williams. And he's going to be hurt by having to do two races where he potentially might lose a couple of positions. It's completely mad. It's a real head scratcher.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, it kind of neutralizes the drama of qualifying potentially. I mean, obviously we don't know. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, complex ideas tend to have higher likelihood of unintended consequences, and this feels like a pretty complex idea. But as a result, I have to concede that this format could produce results that are unexpected because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So our attempts to predict how pedestrian it might be could be pretty pointless. So I have to concede that it might be completely unexpected. But just trying to look at it from the precedent that's been set and the likelihood of teams being very capable of adapting to these kind of format changes, they do tend to be very, very quick to figure out. I've been reading a book, Total Competition, with Ross Brawn. It's basically the book is formatted like an interview with Ross Brawn, basically, and he talks about all about the aspects of being in a team and how they organize the weekend. And you can tell from the way that he describes it that all of those teams are going to be crunching a load of data and sitting down and figuring out exactly how they're going to approach it. So they're going to have really, really put their heads together to figure out how to approach this tactically. So that's kind of from the team's perspective. Now, what about the fan perspective on this as well? Because there's no denying that part of the desire to do this from the FIA and Formula One and Liberty Media's point of view is that they want to try and entice more fans in, get more people watching a potential shorter race if they don't fancy watching the whole thing on Sunday. Do you think it's going to have that effect?
I think it could go one of two ways. I honestly think if the race is entertaining and there's loads of drama, I think it will set a good example. But that doesn't always mean that the next sprint qualifying session and the next sprint race is going to produce exactly the same content. Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I think it's great that people can go on a Friday and see the cars at their maximum speed and then go on a Saturday and actually get to see a 30, 40-minute race, because Sunday's always been the most expensive day. So for those people who would struggle to get a Sunday ticket, potentially might be able to go for a Saturday or Friday and see these cars in all their glory instead of just going around the track and practice, which I think is fantastic. But also, for the likes of me, and maybe I speak on behalf of you as well, the race weekend builds up towards the Grand Prix, the single race on a Sunday where all the teams let their cars off the hooks, put the foot down as hard as they can, and strategically, and it's meant to be this spectacle. It's what we all look forward to in a race weekend. Unless it's Monaco, then we do look forward to qualifying more. But every other race, every other weekend, the race is the most important aspect of the weekend. Will it take away the excitement from the Sunday? If we already see the true pace of the cars on the Saturday, why would you hang around on the Sunday if you already have a good idea of who's going to win?
I suppose, although the stakes are that much lower in the sprint qualifying.
True.
And I've seen some comparisons made to F2 because they have sprint races and feature races as well. But in F2, they're awarded a decent number of points, all the way down to 8th place. It's like 15 points for a win in the sprint race. And then the top 8 is reversed for the feature race. So it's not really all that similar. I don't really like we've talked about reverse grids before. I don't think that's I don't think that's a good idea at all. I don't like that. And and I don't really, I don't know. It's different. If you have a spec series and a feeder series, it's the whole parameters of the sport change in many ways. Formula One, its strength is kind of I don't really want to say the word purity because there's how do you even define that word with something as complicated as Formula One? But there is something about this sort of the desire. I don't know if it really does work like that because we know how big money is, but there is a desire to have this sort of meritocracy. That is that the goal is to get as close to a meritocracy as possible. Hence, they're bringing in these cost caps and the like, and that's the kind of change I want to see. Fundamentally, exactly. I don't have a problem with the current format at all. I think the current format is absolutely fine. So I don't really know why they need to change it, but I'm not especially convinced that it will do that much. There are still some good things for the fans, like it may lead to a more condensed calendar, for example, because if they run more of these events they won't do it at every single race, I don't think, but they might run them every 3 or 4 races or something, which means they can get more value out of fewer races and thus have a slightly more condensed calendar, which in the eyes of a lot of fans, and I speak to people who kind of casually follow Formula One, a very common thing that I hear is, oh, there's just so many races, I can't watch every single week. There may be a chance to condense that down and get more people involved. So it still remains to be seen what impact it will have, really. So that's our thoughts on the sprint qualifying as it currently stands. We also ran a poll on Twitter and asked you to get involved and give us your feedback. Now, we gave 3 options as to how you feel about the sprint qualifying going into the British Grand Prix. We had an option for that you like the idea, one for if you're not a fan of it, and one for if you're not sure how you feel. And the results are decidedly pretty split, quite evenly. 36.7% of you said that you liked the idea, 30% of you said that you weren't a fan of it, and 33.3% of you said that you don't know how you feel. So it's pretty split. It seems like nobody's really going to know. I feel like that could change quite a lot after this race weekend coming up. We'll see. We'll run another poll, I think, after the British Grand Prix and see how people feel out of it after the fact. What do you make of these results, Shane?
It's not surprising because as F1 fans, and you see this up and down on social media and across like multiple, social media accounts, there's always people who love stuff and there's always people who hate stuff and there's always people who just don't care. and will quite happily just watch the sport because they love the sport. And I honestly, this sums up exactly how I feel like the F1 fans are. It's almost a third each, apart from a little bit of the I like the idea, it's got a little bit more oomph behind it. But this is exactly the kind of response I expected. I almost expected the don't know how I feel to be a little bit higher, but the fact that it's almost 33% across the whole board that like it, that don't like it, and actually don't know how they feel. I think, like you said, running the exact same poll on Sunday next week, we'll get some different results, and that'd be really interesting to look back onto.
Yeah, we'll see how that comes out of it. We also asked you to get involved. There was a little discussion going on in the comments as well. So we're just going to go through a couple of those. Thanks to everybody that got involved. We'll start with a message from the Williams supporters account, at Williams Support. Thanks for getting involved. They said, I worry that the top half of the grid will be super careful in the sprint race so as to avoid any grid drops in the main Sunday race. But on the flip side, the bottom 10 may say, what the hell, we're going to go for it, knowing that they have less to lose. Will be very interesting. Likely strategy, do you think? Playing it safe at the top and going for it at the bottom?
I think it's completely possible. But because the reward is so limited, it's rewarding the podium sitters, or they won't be podium sitters because they won't get a podium. The top 3 drivers, yeah, I can see a lot of the cars just thinking, actually, if I just hold position now, that will do us quite well for the race, or we can actually fight for points. Why risk going from 9th to 8th if you can stay in 9th and not start at the back of the grid by potentially going for an overtake and it not working out?
And there's also the risk for the lower teams by trying to go for overtakes. If it causes them any damage, or they have to stress the car or the engine in order to get where they want to go to gain more positions, it's just costing them more in the long run in an already very expensive sport. I do wonder what the cost impact is of running another race. I feel like that's got to be more expensive than just having another practice session. But,
of course, because the cars are running at 100% power. Yeah, the cars will be running at 100% power. There'll be more risk of failures, and we're quite early up. Well, we're just over a third of the way through the season, and some cars are starting to show a little bit of signs of wear and tear, and a couple of engines have been swapped out already. Do teams really want to be putting an extra 100 kilometers at full power on their engines? I don't know. I don't know what the FIA have done to supplement that usage. It'd be really interesting to see how this weekend ends and what if any changes, like you mentioned, will be put forward to the next sprint qualifying, and seeing how we adapt over the course of a season.
Well, thanks very much for getting in touch. Who's next?
Yeah, next one is from Jim Kimberley at Jim on F1. And he has said, I have read a quote perfectly that sums up F1 fans' thoughts on this. And it says, F1 fans are always both unhappy with the current format racing and unhappy at any changes proposed to change the current format, which I completely agree with. And that's reflected on the poll we ran this week, that people are unhappy with what we've done and unhappy to change anything. We're sat just quite nicely in the middle. So it'd be really interesting to see which way it goes.
Yes, we're a sort of undefined amorphous mass of fans. Yeah, it does feel like sometimes they're damned if they do and damned if they don't, and people calling for changes. I feel like I kept wishing they would just wait to see what impact the cost cap had first, because, like I say, I don't really have a problem with the format myself. Yeah. I just wish that they'd wait for their cost cap changes, see what impact they have, and there's some financial bits that are being tested this year, but they're not being monitored quite as closely, so we can't really tell yet. But yeah, like you say, the poll kind of reflects that in a general sense, because the only thing F1 fans can agree on is that we don't really agree on anything.
Exactly. Honestly, that is so perfect. It's so true. Thank you very much, Jim, for tweeting in, and that was at Jim on F1.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And next we have F1 Womble at F1 Womble saying the bottom half will also play it safe not to incur expensive repair bills that they cannot afford. Yeah, we briefly mentioned this a moment ago. It's also kind of possible that the bottom half could either play it safe or really go for it. It's just whether or not there's a big enough impact. It's very track specific as well, isn't it? Like, how powerful is the DRS. How possible is it for certain cars to follow and get in close? And there's that at the Silverstone. There's the nice long hanger straight where there's good opportunities to get past people. So kind of depends how it plays out. Lewis Hamilton said that he thought it would be a bit of a procession, didn't he? He was concerned that people would just hold position. I'm kind of inclined to take the opinion of a guy who's been in Formula One that one and has has that many world championships under his belt. But we'll see, I suppose. It's an interesting perspective, and it still remains to be seen how that'll go. But thanks for getting involved, F1 Womble.
And the final question or thought of the day is from RPM legend Dave Doherty. Thank you very much for tweeting again, Dave. It's always a pleasure. And Dave has said, I like the idea from the start of the process. It's good for racing entertainment. I hope this will be part of Formula One, depending on what it looks like. So it sounds like Dave's all up for a change, and he wants it to be part of the sport, depending on how it goes this weekend. So it sounds like Dave thinks it's got potential, but he's not quite sold on it just yet, which could sum up about a third of how F1 fans are feeling at the moment. So it's very nice to see that actually the poll we got the feedback on reflects all the questions and thoughts coming in. And Dave will be asking you next week what you think of the qualifying session, and hopefully you'll tweet us back and we'll include you in the podcast going forward. But thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, some cautious optimism there, which is probably about right for most people. I wish I could be more optimistic about it. I'm kind of not, but I still reserve full judgment.
Yeah, I feel like
not
Lewis,
really feeling it.
Yeah, I feel like Lewis is spot on. As it might be a bit of a procession, and I can't see it going forward into next year personally, because just of the cost cap, teams aren't going to be willing to, unless they're being supplemented by any means. I can't see teams wanting to pursue the risk of extra damage in an era where we're cutting down on financial costs so much next year.
Yeah, another race is a pretty good way to make the cost go up. It does feel that way. But thanks everyone for getting involved. You can always get in touch at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or get in touch via our website, RacePerMinute.com.
Right, guys, that concludes our RPM roundup of the Silverstone race weekend. It's not very often we do like a bit of a preview, but because of the changes of race format, we felt like it was necessary. And who knows, if it's a bit controversial, maybe we'll do something special after the race or before the next qualifying format. Who knows? But if you guys are watching on YouTube, hello, you can see us. Make sure you give us a subscribe and comment below what your thoughts are on the new format, or the temporary new format, and let us know what you think before, and then come back and let us know what you think afterwards, because they could be two complete different things. I'm hoping so, because I'm feeling a little bit, like I said, I'm not very much looking forward to it at the moment, but I'm hoping I'll be proven wrong and we've had a cracking weekend. If you're listening to us on your podcast app, you can also subscribe and follow us. It really helps. And if you're on Twitter, you should really follow the Race Per Minute Twitter account, because this is where we run those polls. And if you do have any questions for us, you can tweet us. And everyone so far has been read out in the podcast under the View from the Stands section. So no matter what the question, we will read them out. It doesn't have to be about the current situation in Formula One. You can ask us about previous stuff, previous years. Go back, for me, about 10 years. Alex is a little bit older than me, so he's probably got a little bit more knowledge. But yeah, ask us a question and we will find the answer and have a chat about it. You can also do that by emailing the show at info@raceperminute.com, or you can visit raceperminute.com and then follow the contact section, and you can send us a little message through there. And if you really like what we do and want to help support the show, you can do at patreon.com/raceperminute, where you can donate as little as £1 a month to help keep the quality content coming. That's it from me. Alex, any final thoughts on the session?
Well, it's the British Grand Prix, so can't wait to keep the national vibes going. Obviously, this is shortly after England are through to the final. I'm sure you watched that as well, Shane, through to the final of the Euros. So there's a bit of a, there's a little bit of a coalescing of sporting excitement around the country right now. So
so what you're saying is Lewis on the podium with Lando and George. Is that what you're saying? A full British podium at the British Grand Prix?
That's pretty optimistic.
Who knows?
Aston Martin home race, McLaren home race. But yeah, it'll be good. Looking forward to it nonetheless. It's still the British Grand Prix, no matter what happens.
Yeah, hopefully some rain. Until then,
Yeah.
we'll see you next time.
See you then.